Английский, английский. Английский канал.
Английский канал, второй переводчик английский.
Давайте в русский. Вам хорошо слышно вообще? Давайте казахский, первый канал. Давайте второй канал. Вам хорошо слышно?
Английский тогда.
Ну да, это уже так. А когда возвращаетесь назад, когда уже с английского, нажимаете на...
Да, я вас хорошо слышу. Казахский тоже хорошо. Вы можете вы?
Английский язык, говорю в английский язык. Как меня слышно? Английский язык.
founder and president of Beijing Institute of Finance and Sustainability, and numerous other responsibilities that would be just too long to list here. We'd have to devote the entire session for that. He and I go back around 10 years, and I have great respect for his highly professional stature and my personal friendship with him. I am delighted to introduce Dr. Ma Jun, who will enlighten us with his thoughts on today's program. Dr. Ma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anwar, and thanks to Astana International Financial Center for inviting me to join this important forum at Astana Finance Day. I attended the Astana Finance Day a couple of years ago in person, and really looking forward to do that again in the future. Now, in the coming maybe 10 minutes or so, I'd like to say a few words on what's going on in the green and sustainable finance space globally, especially in some of the initiatives which I am deeply involved, including the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, the IPSF Common Ground Taxonomy, and of course, the GIP, namely the Green Investment Principles for the Belt and Road. Then I can touch upon briefly on what's going on in China in the sustainable finance space towards carbon neutrality. Now, at a global level, as many of you know, G20 is the main coordination mechanism for a lot of international organizations work on sustainable finance. And back as early as in 2016, when China was the presidency, we initiated this G20 Green Finance Study Group, which I had the honor to co-chair since then. And this study group is now upgraded to the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. Being a working group, it's a permanent mechanism and has a high profile and able to make recommendations. So starting from last year, the working group has been working on a couple of very important initiatives. We published the G20 Sustainable Finance Roadmap at the end of last year, which was endorsed by G20 leaders. And this year, we're implementing the roadmap through the work on a specific topic, namely creation of a G20 transition finance framework, and also forming a coordination mechanism among international organizations on measuring progress towards sustainability finance development. So let me just touch upon in a little more detail on the G20 transition finance framework. We realized after many years of green sustainable finance development that most of the activities that we focused on were pure green projects. For example, renewable energy, electric vehicles, and so on. But the attention has not been given enough to how to help the carbon-intensive sector and carbon-intensive companies to decarbonize and move towards low carbon and net zero. And that's why many of these sectors, including coal-fired power generation, steel, cement, petrochemical, paper, road transportation, air transportation, actually are finding difficulty in the past few years in getting financing in order for decarbonization. And that was a situation which has contributed to, in some sectors and some places, shortage of production and inflation and many other problems. And that's why, against this backdrop, the G20 has paid a lot of attention starting from last year for the creation of a G20 transition finance framework so that we will be enabling the financial sector to provide financing to carbon-intensive sector and companies to help them to decarbonize. And within this framework, which is still being drafted by the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, we think it's going to have 5 key elements. Number one, we need to have a clear definition of what are transition activities. And specifically, it could take 2 different approaches. One is what we call a taxonomy approach, which is being taken by the EU taxonomy, because within the EU sustainable finance taxonomy, there is already a subset of activities which are labeled as transition activity. And in China, the central bank is also working on a transition taxonomy, which will list the specific technical pathways of major carbon-intensive sectors. And of course, a couple of other countries think they probably are not ready to use a taxonomy approach to define what are qualified transition activities. They may actually go for a principle-based approach, which essentially says that any activities that's in line with Paris Agreement could be considered as transition activities, but you need to get a third-party verification, credible one, and making sure that these activities are science-based and credible. Now, the second component of a transition finance framework is disclosure. Not only we need to disclose specific projects in terms of their carbon reduction and other environmental benefits, but also the fundraiser, namely the company, will have to disclose a transition plan, a credible transition plan, which will enable them to move towards net zero in the medium and longer term. And of course, it involves many different things in the transition plan. There should be targets for short term, medium term, longer term. There should be related carbon accounting information, scope 1, scope 2, and as appropriate, scope 3. And there should be information on how the governance structure is put in place to ensure the transition is implemented properly. The third key element of a transition finance framework is what we call the instruments. We so far have seen some instruments in the debt market, including transition or sustainability linked bonds and loans. But going forward, we're looking for a more complete a toolbox that's involving equity related instruments, risk mitigation instruments, and so on. And the fourth element of the framework is government incentives. Because relative to pure green projects, in fact, the transition projects and transition companies are facing even more difficulties to become bankable. And that's why government incentives in the form of providing low-cost funding, improving availability of funding, and providing possibilities of accessing to renewable energies and many other things should be considered to enable these companies and projects to get financing from financial institutions. And the final element is what we call just transition, or the just element of the transition process. For example, some of the transition activities, if not properly designed and implemented, may lead to unemployment. And some may lead to shortage of production and therefore inflation. So these are the social consequences that we have to consider in the design of a transition finance supported project. And in order to implement such just element of the transition, we need to make sure that certain considerations are integrated in the design of a transaction. For example, in the transition plan, we probably need to ask the company to measure the potential impact of transition on employment. And if there are negative impacts, and they need to come up with mitigation measures to minimize such negative impact. So these are the sort of key considerations that's going into the current discussion within the G20 on developing a transition finance framework, which I hope will be out by end of this year and to be endorsed by the G20 leaders. The second international initiative I'd like to touch upon very briefly is the IPSF Common Ground Taxonomy, which will help facilitate cross-border green transactions. IPSF, as many of you know, was the international platform for sustainable finance, launched by EU and a dozen other countries and jurisdictions, including China, back 3 years ago. And under this platform, China EU co-chaired the Common Ground Taxonomy Working Group with the purpose of creating a taxonomy that's recognized by China and the European markets. But in the future, it can provide the basis or reference for many other jurisdictions to consider incorporating in their development of a taxonomy. So after 2 years' work, the Common Ground Taxonomy was published. The first version was out in November last year, and the second version was just out in early June, namely this year. And now the Common Ground Taxonomy contains 72 activities, which is the majority of the climate mitigation activities in the EU taxonomy, and the majority of the climate mitigation activities in the Chinese taxonomy. And recently, there are already usages of this Common Ground Taxonomy. 3 major Chinese banks have issued international green bonds labeled against the Common Ground Taxonomy, and Deutsche Bank have labeled its loan against the common ground taxonomy. Now, the benefit of that is just to take the China green bond issuance as an example, we don't need to have a double verification. This green bond is accepted in China and accepted internationally by using the common ground taxonomy. So it reduces the transaction cost and also make it much easier to understand, by international investors. And the other usage is other jurisdictions can consider using common ground taxonomy as a building block for developing their own taxonomy. This was the case of Sri Lanka. They recently published its green finance taxonomy using common ground taxonomy as a key building block. And I think many other jurisdictions can consider the same. By doing so, it can save a lot of time and energy because templates of a majority of the climate mitigation activities are already there. You just take it and use it. And I think some of the Central Asian economies can also find it very useful in developing your own taxonomy, either as an official one by the central bank or by financial institutions in the region. And the last international initiative I'd like to touch upon is the GIP, which many of you are very familiar with. The Green Investment Principles were initiated by China Green Finance Committee, which I chair in the City of London back in 2018. And now it's a network involving 40-something very large global financial institutions, managing close to 50 trillion US dollar. And they're all committed to making more green and low carbon investments in developing countries and reduce exposure to polluting and high carbon assets. And in the last couple of years, we expanded this network by setting up regional chapters, including a Central Asian chapter, which is chaired by Mr. Anwar, and with secretary in Astana International Financial Center. It's been working very well with a lot of dissemination capacity building activities in the region. And we're now in the process of setting up an Africa regional chapter, which hopefully will be launched the later part of this year. So with this network, I think we can reach out to many more local financial institutions, especially emerging markets, and connecting them with many of the international initiatives which are working on. Now, just finally, very quick few words on what's going on in China. We have the carbon neutrality goal announced back 1.5 years ago. Now the green financial system within China is moving towards supporting that goal aggressively. For example, last year, our green loan went up 33%, and our green bond issuance increased by 180%. And many of the new tools and methodologies are being applied by the financial system. For example, the central bank in China, namely PBOC, required 24 banks to conduct a climate risk analysis in the form of stress testing. And the central bank is now asking the commercial banks to do carbon accounting, so they will know the carbon emission coming not only from their own operation, namely the buildings and travel, but also the finance emission, namely the loans. And with that, we will provide a basis for these financial firms to plan for carbon neutrality for both their own operation as well as for their lending and investment businesses. So I think many of these initiatives and experience can be exchanged in this platform going forward. So enable participants to learn from each other and join hands to promote the global climate agenda and the sustainable finance agenda going forward. With that, let me thank Mr. Anwar and Astana Financial Center again for inviting me, and I wish today's discussion a great success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ma. It was an excellent presentation and a very comprehensive one. I was delighted to hear you say that how the People's Bank of China, the central bank, is taking a leading role in promoting some of these areas that you touched on, which is something that in the Central Asian republics, we will be talking about that, and our speakers will also highlight how the central banks have taken a role in promoting what you have just talked about. I have a quick question while I have you still on the line. You mentioned about the Africa chapter. Any timelines as to when you might be launching that program?
We're hoping to launch the second half of this year. We're now sort of finding the right time for the chair, who is the CEO of 91. This is a South African asset management company with major operation in London, as well as a secretariat for them to sort of agree on a specific time for the launch event.
Okay, very good. Well, anything that we can help in the Central Asian Republics and Pakistan chapter, you'll be hearing more and more about some of the activities, particularly on Pakistan, where we've achieved substantial progress, and Seema Kama will be talking a little bit about that. Anything we can do to help support your program in Africa, Middle East, we'll be delighted to do so. Okay?
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Anwar.
Thank you. Now, with that excellent presentation, I would like to proceed on to our guest speakers. But before we go on to our guest speakers, I would just like to say a few words myself on our Central Asian Republic chapter, and generally the concept that we've been talking about. Managing climate risk is here to stay, whether we like it or not. And it is on a high priority agenda for all central banks, which was also touched upon by Dr. Ma. Forging a path to international standards in sustainable finance is a challenge we all face. A common international regulatory framework is needed to plug up fragmentation. Interoperability is needed for standardization. For example, the US is using a market-based approach that complicates standardization. The role of public sector is widening, and BIS is faced with a challenge in developing a common standard as central banks undertake more stress testing to ensure stability. Last November, when I was invited to speak at the COP26 Glasgow Summit, Climate Risk Summit, in my capacity as chairman of the Central Asia and Pakistan chapter of Green Investment Principles, GIP, in support of the Belt Road Initiative, BRI, I made two key points that I will reiterate. One, finance is key to unlocking a sustainable future. And two, it can support the transition to a less carbon-intensive economy by channeling capital to green technologies and infrastructure. Climate change is an existential challenge of our time, and its importance has become even more elevated with COVID-19, as it has sensitized the world to how vulnerable we are to the forces of nature. The various projects that you will be hearing about more from our speakers will highlight how Central Asian republics have undergone this program. Now, let me go immediately to our first speaker of the panel, is the Right Honorable Alderman Vincent Keaveney. Lord Keaveney will be talking to us by virtual format, and before he comes on, he is the 693rd Lord Mayor of the City of London. He worked as alderman for the ward of Farringdon within the City of London, and since his election in the city in 2013, he has served on a number of City of London corporate committees, quite a few of them. So without going into too many details, I should also mention he has been in the private sector as well. He was a partner in Norton Rose Group law firm from 2000 to 2005, and was a partner in Baker & McKenzie, a well-known law firm from 2005 to 2015. So he is a recognized leader in this field, and I would like to turn the floor over to Lord Alderman.
Sialam Metzesbe. Hello, I am Alderman Vincent Keaveney, the 693rd Lord Mayor of the City of London. Thank you very much for inviting me to address the Astana Finance Days conference. As Lord Mayor, I am an international ambassador for the UK's financial and professional services, which have built firm links with Kazakhstan over the years. There is a strong economic relationship between the United Kingdom and Kazakhstan, with the United Kingdom consistently ranking as one of the top 5 investors in Kazakhstan since independence. Several of my predecessors as Lord Mayor have visited Kazakhstan in recent years, including Sir Andrew Palmley, who visited the Astana Expo in 2017. The City of London is proud to have supported the development of the Astana International Financial Centre since it was announced in 2015, along with our partners at the City UK. I very much welcome your focus this year on sustainability, social responsibility, and growth. This aligns very well with my own theme as Lord Mayor, people and purpose investing in a better tomorrow, ensuring that people have the opportunities to progress in their careers in financial services regardless of their background, and ensuring that our financial and professional services industries invest with purpose. We're working to make London a home for impact investment and sustainable finance, and ensuring we mobilise the financial power of the city for positive environmental and social impact. I look forward to hosting the Finance for Impact Summit in London on 18th July with businesses from around the world. We recently hosted the Net Zero Delivery Summit on the crucial role of private finance in supporting the transition to net zero and in ensuring countries, all countries indeed, can deliver on the commitments made at the COP26 conference. I strongly support the commitments made by the UK and Kazakhstan at COP26 to work even closer together to tackle climate change. The UK and Kazakhstan are collaborating to realise the commitments of the C5 group and to help raise climate ambition across Central Asia and the wider region. Both countries are strengthening their cooperation on environmental matters, as well as exploring the opportunities that exist for all of us in the transformation to a green economy. The UK is also working with Kazakhstan to develop Kazakhstan's considerable renewable energy potential. And crucially, our two countries are working together on green finance. Astana is leading the way in Central Asia by issuing green bonds and green Islamic financial certificates. And London is leading the green finance revolution in Europe. The British government has made a commitment for the UK to become the world's first net zero aligned global financial centre. Last year, the government issued its first green transition loan, followed by the first green gilt. The London Stock Exchange also introduced the transition bonds segment to provide transition finance for high emitting companies. This followed the Stock Exchange's Global Sustainable Investment Centre, which issued the first certified green bonds in the world. The UK is a place where you can plan your net zero transition, find new technological solutions, and raise capital. So the City of London is your partner in finding and financing the solutions to the global problems and opportunities we all face. And I hope there will be many more examples of successful collaboration between Kazakhstan and the UK in the years ahead. I wish you all a successful conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Alderman. Some of us had a little difficulty in hearing from the volume, but I think we captured most of the issues that have been raised. We appreciate your input and valuable input, and as co-chair of London being with GIP, your input and your participation is extremely valuable. We look forward to hearing more from you in our future forums. Let me proceed on to our next distinguished speaker, is Ms. Madina Abulkasimova. Madina Abulkasimova has began a career at the Agency of the Republic of Kazakhstan for strategic planning as a chief specialist in 1999. From 2003 to 2004, she worked as the head of the strategic planning department of the Ministry of Economy and budget planning for the Republic of Kazakhstan. By decree of the President of the Republic of Kazakhstan, dated December 2019, Ms. Medina was appointed the chairperson of the Agency of the Republic of Kazakhstan for regulation and development of financial markets. Let me say that I'm delighted to pass on the panel to Ms. Medina for her comments.
Okay, есть звук, да? Dear session participants, on behalf of the Agency for financial market regulation and development. Let me greet you at the ESG session of the 5th annual Astana Finance-Based Conference. I'm sorry, we're having a problems with.
I think we can hear you, Ms. Madina.
Okay, we fixed the problem. The transitions to the principles of sustainable development and increasing the share of green financing in the economy is a key global trend, which has a direct influence on the financial sector. Transformation of the domestic economy in accordance with international ESG principles and standards is becoming an important factor for attracting a new foreign investment. It is important that the pressure for ESG change is coming from all sides, both from demand and supply side. Access to the global capital markets is becoming more and more linked to implementation of ESG principles by financial organizations. The issuers and borrowers are also creating demand for green type of finance. The rapidly changing environment sets the challenges for regulators around the world to adapt quickly. On a global level, regulators around the world have developed a number of ESG-related standards and principles, which became benchmarks for regulators. To name a few, I would like to highlight ESG principles and standards developed by Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, Global Reporting Initiatives, and Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Kazakhstan also is moving really fast to implement the international standards in financial sector. Today, together with the support of international financial organizations such as International Finance Corporation and European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, we have developed a roadmap for implementation of ESG standards in the financial sector of the Republic of Kazakhstan. First of all, our first approach is to set up recommendations for financial regulations on voluntarily basis. At first stage, we targeting the financial organizations to start voluntarily disclose information on the degree of exposure to ESG risks. Financial organizations will be able to publish reports as part of their annual statements with objective information on assessing the impact of ESG risks on their activities. The next step will be the transition from voluntary to mandatory disclosure of information on ESG activities of financial organizations in reporting and compliance with legal requirements for the internal risk management system and corporate governance systems. At the third stage, ESG risks are planned to become a part of the supervisory process. In our annual supervisory process and assessment of banks, we plan that all ESG risks will be included and will be monitored and evaluated by regulator. As a part of our stress testing of the banking sector, starting from 2024, we are planning to implement ESG risk in an annual stress testing exercise of the banking sector. To implement the stages, agency actively cooperates, as I said, with international financial organizations. It is important that in order to adopt a necessary legislative and normative basis, that we first of all look at the international standards and principles that are developed around the world, but secondly also take into account the current level of readiness of financial organizations. We saw a significant progress in the financial sector of Kazakhstan in terms of understanding and implementing the ESG standards. If we look at the banking sector, currently 5 banks are already producing their reports with a full disclosure of ESG related risks. In terms of the other market participants, if we look at the capital markets, if we look at also insurance companies, the progress there is more right now based on the green finance attracting and green finance and raising green finance in order to facilitate the creation of a green market, green financing market in Kazakhstan. last year, important changes to legislation were made. The necessary legal environment was formed for issuance of sustainable financing instruments such as green, social bonds, sustainable development bonds. The procedures for issuing and placing these bonds, as well as the procedures for their verification, were also created and put in a normative basis for capital markets. Last year, we saw a big increase in the demand and for green and social financing, both at Astana International Financial Center at AIX, as well as Kazakhstani Stock Exchange. So the total volume, the total market for sustainable development bonds exceeds $200 million. Last year, around $125 million of new issuance was placed on CASIA with participation of Asian Development Bank, Eurasian Development Bank, Entrepreneurs Development Fund DAMU. And we saw another 83 million of bonds placed at AIX, issued by Eurasian Development Bank and Samruk Energo. We also saw a big demand for such bonds, so the demand for these bonds were higher than the supply of such financial instruments. It is important that what our speaker, Mr. June, said, that it is also important that you have a right taxonomy for green bonds and for green financing. In Kazakhstan, we adopted a new ecological code, and the government adopted last year a new taxonomy for green financing projects, and it gave an important and necessary condition for issuing and for attracting a new green financing for the real sector of economy. So we believe that with all these necessary changes that were taken on part of the government, on part of also financial regulators, in creation of a necessary legal environment, necessary normative basis, the market for green financing will develop further. At the same time, it is important to continue to raise awareness of the financial organizations, to raise awareness of the real sector companies on the importance of speeding up the process of adapting to new climate agenda, to new requirements which we are seeing around the world. Thank you very much. I will stop here.
Thank you very much, Ms. Madina. It was an excellent presentation, and I noted there are a couple of points that you made that are very, very valuable, and that you have taken a formal approach to supervising the ESG standards by undergoing some stress testing. And it was also noted the comments that you made about how your total sustainable finance market in Kazakhstan has reached over 200 million US dollars that includes both green and social bonds and loans. That's a very good step, and very encouraging for the rest of the Central Asian republics to take note of and follow. So thank you very much for your very, very kind and very, very valuable contribution to this.
Thank you.
I will now like to move on to our next guest speaker, is the IFC project with the State Bank that leads to the green banking guidelines, which is going extremely well, with the launch of a certain manual, ESRM manual recently as well. But without my going into any of those details, I think Seema will talk about how Pakistan has achieved those green banking guidelines, how well advanced we are in that stage. Seema, I'll turn the floor over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, and greetings to everyone from Pakistan. I'm very grateful to the Astana International Finance Center for organizing this important session, and also very grateful to Mr. Yasin Anwar, because he's played a key role in our journey towards green banking and the green banking guidelines. And I'm in particular, I think, very optimistic and encouraged by the topic of today's session, which is the transformative potential, because we often get very pessimistic in this topic. And I think it's very important that we focus on the transformation that we can jointly achieve in this area. I won't focus too much on what other colleagues have said already, which is the role of central banks, for example, the People's Bank of China, in understanding the threat that climate change poses to the financial system. We also understand that on the demand side, we are seeing a great change in investor decisions, and major fund managers are making ESG compliance very important to their investment decisions. And according to the climate bond initiatives, bonds and debts of this nature have reached $3 trillion by the end of the first quarter of 2022. So we believe that this trend towards sustainability is absolutely essential. I'll talk a little bit more in my remarks about what we have been doing in Pakistan. Pakistan has a very small carbon footprint. However, we are extremely vulnerable to climate change. We are witnessing variability of monsoons, melting glaciers, and resulting water scarcity, and extreme events such as floods, droughts, heat waves, and of course pollution, which threatens both our urban centers and can cause issues of food scarcity. So it is something that is a very serious issue for us. According to the Global Climate Risk Index, published by German Watch, Pakistan is continually ranked amongst the 10 countries most affected by the adverse impact of climate change. So this is a real issue, and which we have to take seriously. The central bank, the State Bank of Pakistan, is a responsible regulator of the financial system and has undertaken a number of initiatives to face this challenge and align it, most importantly, with international best practice. We began this journey with our green banking guidelines, which we issued back in 2017. These guidelines set out expectations for integrating environmental risks and performances into the bank's lending activities. There were 4 main sections to this. The first was, of course, environment risk management, which encouraged banks to integrate environmental risk into credit management tools. Then the green business facilitation, to encourage banks to facilitate environmentally friendly green businesses. This was designed to align the focus of the banking industry's investments with the SDGs. And then, of course, as we've all talked about, own impact reduction, because we have very much a bricks and mortar banking system so far, and we would encourage financial institutions to reduce their own impact through conscious management of the consumption of energy. So I'm happy to share that we made significant progress. 81% of our banks have formulated green banking policies. 71% of them have integrated environmental risk within their credit risk assessment procedures. And 68% have developed due diligence checklists, while some banks have also developed sector-specific checklists. But of course, there's a lot to do. And we're still at a very nascent stage in implementing green banking practices, particularly in risk management and green finance and capacity building. So we recognize the need that we have for handholding and support and adopting best practice. And we initiated, along with the International Finance Corporation, the Pakistan Sustainability Banking Project, which Yasin Anwar Saab is helping us with as well. The objective of this project is to update the environmental risk section of our green banking guidelines. And to align our guidelines as best we can, the SPP and IFC are incorporating social risk along with environmental risk in our green banking guidelines. I believe social issues like health and safety, child and forced labor, illegal land acquisition, etc., are very important considerations for banks' credit risks. Therefore, it is important that banks take social risk into consideration as well. And we have to, if I can be a bit blunt, go beyond lip service and simply doing a tick box exercise. One of the action items under the Sustainable Banking Project in the development of environmental and social risk management, there's been the manual for banks. This manual provides tools and procedures to strengthen implementation of our green banking guidelines. For example, it has a larger focus on social and climate risks, which are relevant and crucial in our environment. The environmental and social due diligence checklist provides a robust and auto-generated quantitative risk rating system to reduce subjectivity of the qualitative risk assessment method listed in our original guidelines. The checklist also incorporates guidance notes to assist bank staff in performing their functions of due diligence, because we had noticed, become much more, shall we say, subjective, and we need to have quantifiable tools. This project also involves the development of a measurement and evaluation template to further drive effective implementation of the green banking guidelines and to facilitate monitoring and better demonstration of their green banking activities. This template aims to support self-monitoring and evaluation of performance, facilitate effective and demonstratable implementation progress, assist banks to disclose green banking related information in a relevant, useful, consistent, and comparable manner, and to encourage public disclosure to enhance trust and confidence amongst all stakeholders, particularly investors, clients, and the everyday customer. The measurement and evaluation template is built on our basic green banking guidelines and takes international initiatives into consideration, such as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So as Marjun was saying earlier, we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but learn and collaborate with each other. The State Bank has also, we talked a little bit earlier about financing, and we've not limited ourselves to just enabling a regulatory environment. To encourage both banks and their customers to build their green financing portfolios, we have issued the State Bank's financing scheme for renewable energy. And this is a really very important cornerstone. I'm delighted to share that the scheme has been really successful and has provided refinance on cheaper rates to more than 1,500 projects with a cumulative capacity of 1,400 megawatts and total outstandings of close to $400 million. So this is very important, and what we've taken a recent step is that we have extended these guidelines and this refinance scheme by another 2 years because it is of crucial importance to our countries. So the central bank's abilities to assist in real and measurable transformation carries great potential. And while there's a lot to do and time is of the essence, I remain very hopeful that our joint efforts will take us forward and bring about true and meaningful change. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seema, for a very comprehensive presentation, and we may seek your input, your team's input to help Central Asian republics and forums that perhaps the rest of us can benefit from as well. Thank you again for your contribution. We are running a little tight on schedule. We've got only a few minutes left, and we've got one speaker quickly to go forward with. I'm going to quickly introduce him, Ravi Vardana. He's a qualified chartered accountant with ICAEW, member of the IFRS Foundation Working Group. He is going to talk to us quickly about the IFRS Foundation. In April 2021, announced the development of the IFRS Sustainability Reporting Standard. I'm not going to go through any more because we are running tight on schedule. Ravi, the floor is all yours.
Thank you ever so much. It's a pleasure to be here and looking forward to sharing what we've been up to at the IFRS Foundation on the establishment of the International Sustainability Standards Board. It's a pleasure to be here with the other panelists as well. Really enjoyed what has been presented, and thank you ever so much, Shafin and Anwar, for your excellent moderation. So To very much set the scene, what is the ISSB? It stands for the International Sustainability Standards Board, set up by the IFRS Foundation. And I think it's appropriate to actually set the scene and focus on what the ISSB's objectives are. So firstly, the objective of the ISSB is to set requirements that result in the provision of high quality, transparent information about the effects of sustainability related risks and opportunities useful for banks, investors, and the capital markets. Like the IFRS Foundation's accounting standards setting board, the objective of the ISSB is that these requirements are applied in many jurisdictions around the world so that globally comparable information is provided for investors. We refer this to as a comprehensive global baseline of sustainability disclosures. In addition to setting disclosure requirements, the ISSB plans to establish a digital taxonomy, different from the taxonomies which have been spoken about earlier, but and this taxonomy is to do with the digital capture of the sustainability related financial information disclosed by reporting entities. The ISSB will work with jurisdictions around the world. We know that jurisdictions will have particular information needs, including in some cases to meet the information needs of stakeholders beyond the investors, such as to meet the public policy needs. The ISSB will work with jurisdictions in order to facilitate the adoption of the global baseline. However, when particular additional information is needed by a jurisdiction, that this can be added on addition to the ISSB's requirements. We refer to this as the building blocks approach. To really ensure jurisdictional uptake, we have set up a jurisdictional working group, which includes the likes of the Ministry of Finance from China and Japan, the European Commission, as well as its reporting arm, EFRAG, as well as the UK Financial Conduct Authority and the US SEC. We are looking forward to receiving comment letters on the 2 exposure drafts which we've put out into the public domain earlier this year, and the consultation for those 2 draft standards is the 29th of July. The first standard, draft standard which we're looking for comments on, is called the General Requirements Exposure Draft. So when the exposure drafts were published, the press release said that the ISSB had set out the proposals for the global baseline on sustainability related financial disclosures. It was the General Requirements document that provides the basis for that statement, because it sets out the overarching requirements that an entity provide information on all significant sustainability related risks and opportunities. It requires the disclosure of material information on all significant sustainability related risks and opportunities for investors, banks, and the capital markets to price in risks and opportunities and to assess enterprise value. It's akin to IFRS accounting standards IAS 1 and IAS 8. And we've also, because this is all encompassing, we're proposing that there is a signposting to the work of the SASB standards and the CDSB framework, which was consolidated into the IFRS Foundation earlier this year. The second exposure draft focuses on identifying climate-related risks and opportunities as being significant when they apply to the climate document, to identify the disclosures. And it requires the disclosure of information about physical risks, such as flood risks, transition risks, such as regulatory change, and climate-related opportunities, such as new technology. when we want to make sure that we get as much feedback as possible from our stakeholders about these important exposure drafts. And you are those important stakeholders. So we very much welcome comments from yourselves and those in the audience to participate during this consultation period. And to facilitate this, we have set up surveys to accompany the exposure drafts. These include the same questions as those in the exposure drafts and enable entities to choose whether they prefer to write a letter or to respond using a survey. The comment letter period is open until the 29th of July, and we very much welcome the thoughts from Kazakhstan, as well as the representatives from other countries on this call. So I'm going to pause there and hand back over to yourself, Yazin.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ravi, for your excellent comments. IFRS is an important body, and we'll be seeking your input going forward in our future forums. So we look forward to hearing more from you. We have run a little over our time. We managed to get our sponsors to extend our time for just a few more minutes to allow for one or two questions that have come up from the audience. And I will raise those questions to the specific speaker that it was addressed to. First one is to Ms. Medina. The question is as follows, and the second question is for Ravi, which I'll get to secondly. Why don't I just raise to Medina first? Will there be relief, more lenient requirements for banks implementing green finance? And secondly, what 5 banks or so in Kazakhstan to be disclosed for ESG risks? Would you be able to comment on that, Ms. Medina?
Sure. So first of all, as I said, we developed a 3-stage approach, as many regulators around the world did. Since it's a new topic, a new theme, so the international standards and guidelines are being developed as we speak. There is already a set of internationally set and recognized standards, such as TCFD standards, which we are heavily relying on. But at the same time, in order to develop our regulatory base in accordance with the best international standards and principles, both in banking sector and capital markets, we decided to work closely with the International Finance Corporation and EBRD. So the standards, as I said, at the first stage, it will be voluntary, on a voluntarily basis. At the second stage, next year, we're planning to do it mandatory. And starting from 2024, it becomes a part of our supervisory process. So all the standards and assessment of ESG risks will be incorporated in corporate governance standards and practices of our banks. In terms of the second question, so how many banks? So right now in Kazakhstan, 96 companies are preparing annual reports on sustainable development in accordance with ESG standards. Out of them, 5 second-tier banks, such as Halyk Bank, Sberbank, Eurasian Bank, Housing Construction Savings Bank, and Development Bank of Kazakhstan. They are publishing already their reports in accordance with ESG principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that concise answer. I believe we may have time for just one more question, which has been raised for Ravi. The quick question is, if you can quickly, Ravi, answer this because our time has run out. What is better for banks and companies to implement now in Kazakhstan, GRI or SASB? Would you be able to comment on that, please?
Yeah, of course. I think it's really important for companies to actually start thinking now. It's very clear from the comments from the panelists today that things are moving towards a mandatory basis. And from our perspective, with the ISSB has consolidated the SASB, the SASB standards And we would encourage the adoption of the SASB standards and other materials within the ISFB remit, such as the TCFD principles, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and also the requirements of the CDSB. My suggestion is to really but also look at the complementarity with the GRI as well. And we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the GRI, noting that there are similarities with regards to the actual requirements, but we do serve different stakeholders. The ISSB is focused on the investor, and GRI is focused on wider stakeholders beyond investors. Perhaps that's helpful. Over to yourself, Yasin.
Thank you very much, Ravi. Our time has run out, and I would like to quickly conclude by thanking each one of our very distinguished speakers who have presented a wealth of information that has enlightened each one of us in the audience, as well as the speakers themselves. I certainly have picked up a few things, and there are mandatory approaches that seem to be emanating from various regulatory bodies, from China to Pakistan to Kazakhstan and elsewhere. And Ravi, your input was very, very valuable in that regard. Once again, I would like to conclude this by thanking all the speakers for coming on board. And we look forward to inviting you again because of your valuable input, and see how much we progressed in the coming months in our future forums. And we hope that you will be able to accept our invitation again. Thank you very much for your kind contribution, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much again. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Әлем қарқынды дамуда. Технологиялық ілгерілеу үшін металдар мен электр энергиясының түрлі көздері қажет. ENG әлемді осындай ресурстармен қамтамасыз етеді. ENG кәсіпорындары әлемнің 15 елінде жұмыс істейді. Қуаты кәсіпорындардың дені Қазақстанда шоғырланған.
At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share.
Бұл не екен? Ойын емес, мынау. Бәлкім сіз визаны жай ғана банк карталар деп ойлайтын боларсыз. Егер мен сіздің әр жерде көріп жүрген атауыңыз жай ғана атаудан әлде қайда зор нәрсе екенін айтсам, не дер едіңіз? Виза дегеніміз желі. Ол адамдарға ақшаны ана жерден мына жерге аударуға көмектеседі. Және де мына жігітке тіпті таудың басына шығып алса да онлайн жұмыс істеп, джинсаны сатуға көмектеседі. Бұл кадр сыртында қалатын, бірақ бәрін бір-бірімен байланыстыра алатын ғажайып. Ол таңғы кофе ішкенде әлемге жаңа көзбен қарауға мүмкіндік беріп, бизнесті бизнес ететін нәрселерге көзқарасты өзгерте алады. Виза бәрін біріктіре алатын желі. Сізге қажет жерде, сіздің арманыңыздағы жерде, сізге лайық жерде. Бұл желі арманды іске асырудың кілті. Өйткені виза күн сайын бүкіл әлем бойынша есік ашады. Коммерция бәрімізді біріктірсін деген оймен.
Вне зависимости от того, кто вы и чем занимаетесь, должно быть что-то, что объединяет нас всех и дает энергию творить будущее здесь и сейчас. Зебра кофе. Здесь и сейчас. Для всех и каждого.
Hello, I'm Andrew Gamble. I'm the chairman of the global board of Grata International, which is the Swiss verein which exercises overall control and direction for the Grata International network. There are a number of aspects of the work that I do for Grata. One is I speak to international law firms who are significant clients of the firm. I certainly enjoy doing that and explaining to them about the value of Grata. I discuss the strategic direction of the firm with the senior partners, and I also work proactively with the Integration Centre and the International Cooperation Department, who are performing an excellent function on behalf of the firm. And last but not least, I speak to potential new firms. That's a very interesting question. I think it's really to do with our focus. We're very much focused on a particular regional area. And international law firms have retreated from that space, whereas we are within this very large geographical area extending from Eastern Europe through to China. And we provide, as a result, very significant services in those markets. Well, we've clearly been through some very difficult times since Grata was set up nearly 30 years ago. Most recently, of course, we've had the pandemic and there are other difficulties in the region. I think that the success, or the indication of the success of Grata, is that not only are we surviving in this market, but we're getting stronger and expanding. The verein structure, which is a particular legal construct established under Swiss law, enables us to provide international coordination and direction, but at the same time it leaves all the local officers to pursue their own business activities in a manner which is most amenable to success within each of their own local markets.
Әлем қарқынды дамуда. Технологиялық ілгерілеу үшін металдар мен электр энергиясының түрлі көздері қажет. ENG әлемді осындай ресурстармен қамтамасыз етеді. ENG кәсіпорындары әлемнің 15 елінде жұмыс істейді. Қуаты кәсіпорындардың дені Қазақстанда шоғырланған. Компанияның соңғы 5 жылда елдің жалпы ішкі өнімге қосқан үлесі 5 триллион теңге. Қазақстандағы жоғары маркалы бастапқы алюминий және глинозем өндіретін алғашқы және жалғыз кәсіпорын ENG құрамында. Электр энергиясының 17%-ын ENG-дің электр энергетикалық активтері өндіріп тұр. Шетелге өнім өткізудің негізгі нарықтары Европа елдері, Қытай, Ресей, Жапония. Осы жетістіктердің барлығы біздің қызметкерлеріміздің еңселі еңбегінің жемісі. Компанияның басты құндылығы адам. ENG жердің және адамзаттың әлеуетін ұқыпты пайдалана отырып, өзіне сенім артқандардың өркендеуін қамтамасыз етіп келеді.
We know it's going to take many forms of energy to meet the world's needs while creating a cleaner future for all. At Chevron, we're lowering the carbon emissions intensity of our operations, investing in lower carbon technologies, and exploring renewable fuels of the future. We work hard to care for the homes we love, but it's only human to protect the one we share.
Бұл не екен? Ойын емес, мынау. Бәлкім сіз визаны жай ғана банк карталар деп ойлайтын боларсыз. Егер мен сіздің әр жерде көріп жүрген атауыңыз, жай ғана атаудан әлде қайда зор нәрсе екенін айтсам, не дер едіңіз? Виза дегеніміз желі. Ол адамдарға ақшаны ана жерден мына жерге аударуға көмектеседі. Және де мына жігітке тіпті таудың басына шығып алса да, онлайн жұмыс істеп, джинсаны сатуға көмектеседі. Бұл кадр сыртында қалатын, бірақ бәрін бір-бірімен байланыстыра алатын ғажайып. Ол таңғы кофе ішкенде әлемге жаңа көзбен қарауға мүмкіндік беріп, бизнесті бизнес ететін нәрселерге көз қарасты өзгерте алады. Виза бәрін біріктіре алатын желі. Сізге қажет жерде, сіздің арманыңыздағы жерде, сізге лайық жерде. Бұл желі арманды іске асырудың кілті. Өйткені виза күн сайын бүкіл әлем бойынша есік ашады. Коммерция бәрімізді біріктірсін деген оймен.
Вне зависимости от того, кто вы и чем занимаетесь, должно быть что-то, что объединяет нас всех и дает энергию творить будущее здесь и сейчас. Зебра кофе. Здесь и сейчас. Для всех и каждого.
Hello, I'm Andrew Gamble. I'm the chairman of the global board of Grata International, which is the Swiss verein which exercises overall control and direction for the Grata International network. There are a number of aspects of the work that I do for Grata. One is I speak to international law firms who are significant clients of the firm. I certainly enjoy doing that and explaining to them about the value of Grata. I discuss the strategic direction of the firm with the senior partners, and I also work proactively with the Integration Centre and the International Cooperation Department, who are performing an excellent function on behalf of the firm. And last but not least, I speak to potential new firms. That's a very interesting question. I think it's really to do with our focus. We're very much focused on a particular regional area. And international law firms have retreated from that space, whereas we are within this very large geographical area extending from Eastern Europe through to China. And we provide, as a result, very significant services in those markets. Well, we've clearly been through some very difficult times since Grata was set up nearly 30 years ago. Most recently, of course, we've had the pandemic and there are other difficulties in the region. I think that the success, or the indication of the success of Grata, is that not only are we surviving in this market, but we're getting stronger and expanding. The verein structure, which is a particular legal construct established under Swiss law, enables us to provide international coordination and direction, but at the same time it leaves all the local officers to pursue their own business activities in a manner which is most amenable to success within each of their own local markets.